Staple foods such as gari, corn, rice, yam, beans, millet, potatoes, and others have all jerked up with prices above the common man's pocket. Now, with the rising food inflation, it is not uncommon that some households have been forced to the ratio of one proper meal per day, and sometimes none at all. At the root of the spiraling food inflation is the insecurity ravaging the northern part of Nigeria, which is the food basket of the nation. Farmers can no longer go to the farms for fear of being kidnapped or killed. Those who can access their farms have to pay monies to bandits to allow them passage. There is a food crisis brewing in the country, and latest report from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says that before the end of 2022, about 19.4 million Nigerians across 21 states will no longer be able to afford food. That is the crux of our discussion next. Joining us now is the MD and Country Director at Oxfam International, Dr. Vincent Ahonsi. Dr. Ahonsi, good morning. It's good to have you join us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Great. Now, from your perspective, the issue that we've been talking about, the issue of food insecurity for a long time, and it seems from past research, everyone knows that when there is no planting in a certain season, it's going to impact the next season and food security generally, especially in a place where farmers depend on seasons to farm and not relying on irrigation where there can be all year farming. What do you see from your projections as to the challenges before food insecurity in Nigeria from what you see?
Thank you so much. Number one, the problem of food insecurity is not new to Nigeria, and it's not new to the bigger world, so to speak. In March earlier this year, we did say that more than 27 million West Africans were facing extreme hunger. And we did raise that alarm, and we said in Nigeria alone, about 19.5 million Nigerians, our fellow brothers and sisters, were facing extreme hunger. And we further went that if something is not done about it, it is going to become worse by August, September, which is the rain season that you have just spoken about. Now more Nigerians are hungry, and like you have rightly said, about 828 million people around the world go to bed at night without food. And if we bring that to West Africa, the situation is so pathetic. And Nigerians in their millions are extremely hungry. So something needs to be done. Like you asked me, what are the problems? The major problems we seem to be facing, one, the government is not investing enough in agriculture, unfortunately. We have what we call the Malabo Declaration of 2014, where the heads of government said they will be able to invest not less than 10% of their annual budget in the agriculture sector. In 2021, Nigeria was able to spend only 1.73% of its annual budget on agriculture. And this year, the budget hovers around 1.8%, abysmally low. So the investment is very low. And when investment is low, it simply means that the support that the agricultural sector needs is not gotten. Right. We need to, Nigeria depends so much on international food systems and international food markets. We practically import almost everything. That is not good for the country. We need to start supporting local food production. We have to do this intentionally. We have to go further to see what can we do to make people to now go back to agriculture in the country, because we are talking about Nigeria. Now, when we do that, we also have to think, what are the things militating against this? Like you have rightly said, insecurity and conflict. A lot of people have been displaced. A lot of people who should be out there cultivating their lands and producing food are now displaced across the country. You see young men, they are now driven away, they go to the urban centers, they start riding motorcycles. In some instances, they are now dependent on other people to feed them. Something has to be done in line with that. And the other thing that seems to be a problem now is the issue of gender rights. In many communities in Nigeria, the women produce more of the foodstuffs we eat. When we were young in those days in the village, we did not buy anything when it comes to foodstuffs. And these women need to be supported in terms of inputs, in terms of resources, in terms of financial services, and in terms of their rights and interests to own land. That needs to be taken care of if we are talking about food security in Nigeria. And like I said, a system that depends mostly on international imports, international markets, international food chain and supply chain is faulty, it's not dependent. I mean, it's not something that we could say is sustainable. And lastly, we have to think of agricultural production that is climate resilient. We cannot continue to have bush burning. We cannot continue to have all these problems, all these crises where farmers are driven away from their farms. And we cannot continue to have instances where women cannot even go to the farm without being accompanied by male counterparts, or women are not given the right to own lands, and say we want to solve food crisis problem in Nigeria. It is practically not possible. And lastly, you cannot allocate 1.8% of your annual budget for agriculture and you expect a miracle. So these are the problems.
Obviously, what you're telling us is that government's handling of this matter of food insecurity has not been impressive. But recently, the federal government signed a memorandum of cooperation with Poland to address this matter. And the focus of this memorandum is increasing efficiency in the agricultural sector. How much of a difference will this make?
When we talk about food crisis, a lot of us tend to misunderstand what the issues are. To solve the problem of food crisis, we do not just need only machineries. If you look at it at the global level, the farmers are producing enough food globally, but their production of this food globally is done in an industrial way, in an exploitative way. Yeah. And the distribution of this food is uneven and it's not just. So we have some countries that are very rich, some countries that take agriculture as an industry and they invest a lot in agriculture, they produce this food. One, there is an unequal distribution. The food supply, the global food supply chain was made mockery of by the Ukrainian crisis because a lot of low-income countries who are dependent on international markets for their food supply now found out that they couldn't have access to them. So if we are talking about similar MOUs in Nigeria, we shouldn't be talking about industrialization of agriculture. No. We shouldn't be talking just about bringing in the machineries. No. We are not talking about the exploitative, the industrial, and the unsustainable agricultural system that has happened in the Western world. We see what is food crisis now affects even the Western world, where in America, the figure has increased from 7.8, people don't have access to food, 7.8 to 11.2, just from August last year to April this year. So if we are signing MOU, this MOU should be local. How can we increase local food production? That is what we need. How can we make it just? How can we make it sustainable? What we need is a contextual architecture and a framework, not just bringing in the machinery. Yes, please.
Understand you well. You're advocating for a homegrown solution, not just the Western or the foreign partnership that would have been the usual readily available options. But an inquiry that could come out from your standpoint could be that do we have what it takes, internally to solve this problem on our hands?
Thank you. Yes, we do. Like I said earlier on, when some of us were young children in the village, we rarely buy food from the markets. The yam we eat, the rice we produce, in those days, we bring some from Afuze. These are not rocket science. What we need now is to see how we could take our compatriots back and support local production, small-scale farmers. How do we enable them? How can we make that man that is in Sokoto or that is in Zamfara or that is in Abeokuta or wherever be able to cultivate and produce food in his own or her own small-scale nature and scale? That is what we're talking about. That is the first step. The government needs to come out and have that political will to be able to invest more in agriculture, like I said, because it has to be driven by government, unfortunately, or fortunately. And until the government is seen to be at the forefront of doing something tangible about it, you can't just put 1.8% of your budget, annual budget, in agriculture as an investment, and you expect a miracle. So the government has to be out there. How do we give these people what they need in terms of seedlings? How do we educate them on how to produce food? How do we make the production to be climate resilient? These are the things we should be talking about. How can we make women to have access to financial services? How do we make women to have access to land rights? These are the conversation. These are the conversation that we need to be engaged in now, not just signing that photo up, MOUs and all that. Bringing in some foreign investors and giving them a large portion of the land and giving them machineries will not solve our problems. If we don't go that way, where every man, every woman in every locality will have access, because the problem now has gone beyond, it's beyond production. We will tell me that we have the rice pyramids that was demonstrated in Abuja some time ago. And these are locally produced rice, we are told. But at the rate at which they are selling it for 30,000 naira for a 50-kilo bag of that rice, how many Nigerians can afford that? So the problems has gone further from production in the country to distribution to access and to affordability. So we need to have an all-encompassing framework where we will be able to make sure that our people have access to it and they have the enablement to be able to afford it. And not only that, I think there's a need for some, I won't say regulation in the markets in terms of foodstuff. Now we say there's food crisis, just like we had during the COVID-19 era. Some people are making money out of it. COVID-19 made billionaires. People reaped so much from COVID-19, from the medicaments, from the testing, from the vaccine, from the personal protective equipment. Same thing is happening now with the food crisis. The food companies are making so much money. The food vendors, the large ones, are making so much money. They are becoming, we already have across the globe now 62 billionaires made out of this food crisis. So it's like the inequality continues, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, getting hungrier and getting more, poorer. So unfortunately, so the inequality in the land has to be balanced. It has to be, the government has to step up to see what they can do. We have to be pro-poor. We have to be pro the people at the bottom, the 99%, not the 1% that's at the top of the pyramid. That is where the government should come in with the political will. The government has to drive the process, and the stakeholders must be ready to support the government. The conglomerates are making money out of this food crisis. How did we end here, where all our food, if not majority of our food, is imported? We practically import ridiculous items in this country when it comes to food items. Go to any five-star hotel or big hotel and look at their breakfast table. You can't see any locally produced food there, unfortunately. So the government has to be inward looking. The government has to lead the process. The populace should be able to follow. But like I said, without political will at the top and at the government level, we won't be able to do much.
Dr. Honsi, the last 10 to 15 years, government has been intentional on the production of rice, and that seemed to be the weight of the interest of government. I wonder what you make of that, because according to statistics reports from Statista, it says that Nigeria is not even amongst the top 10 rice producers in the world. We have China, we have India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, Burma, Philippines, Pakistan, Brazil, and several other countries. Nigeria is not even amongst the top 15 countries of the world producers of rice. When it comes to comparative advantage, what would you advise? This issue of so much reliance on rice, is it harming us, or is this something we can break into?
Thank you. I think, number one, that Nigerians love rice, there's no question about it. And there's nothing bad in that. But I think the hype about Nigerian producing rice, that was overrated. That is my personal opinion. It is good, but when you go out and say you want to deliberately invest in rice production because Nigerians love rice, have you looked at those who are producing rice, who were producing ofada rice in those days, those who were producing afuze rice in those days? Every locality in this country, rice can grow well if the farmers are given the wherewithal, the knowledge, the skills to know what to do and when to do it concerning rice production. So the government stepped forward with a lot of publicity. And what we were told is that it will get to a point we will not eat foreign rice anymore because that was taking a lot of foreign exchange. But after a couple of months or even years of running this program, I think we haven't really made any change. I mean, we haven't really made much impact. And while we were there talking about rice production, we forgot our maize. We practically forgot our yam tubers. We forgot other food crops. And we forgot that for people to really be able to key into a program, they need to own it. And that program needs to be sustainable. And government leading the process was not really carrying the people along. It was only, a couple of states in the north, in the far north. Majority of the states in the south were practically not involved in this program, so to speak. So the government will have been more innovative in saying how can we carry as much communities and stakeholders along, and how can we hand it over to the community? How can they own it? It wasn't owned. Because if the government stops support, we practically won't be able to see the so-called pyramids anymore. So now it has not even taken us to the El Dorado of making us one of the top 10 producers of rice. The foreign rice are still available in the market. The American rice are still available in the market. Even the locally produced ones, they are not available. They are not accessible and they are not affordable. Like I said, you can't produce a local bag of rice as 30,000 naira, and you expect majority of Nigerians who live, millions of Nigerians who live on less than $2 a day to be able to afford that. 30,000 naira is the minimum wage in Nigeria. So if I use my minimum wage to buy a locally produced bag of rice, what becomes of my family? Transportation, electricity, my children's schooling, tuitions to be paid. So we haven't really done much. I think we need to go back to the drawing board. Again, like I said, we have to start from the core investment. What is the agricultural budget, annual budget in Nigeria? What is allocated for agriculture? We had a conference in Lagos recently. Yes, please.
Yes, and that is where I want to take it up with you. What would be the ideal budgetary allocation from your point of view if you said that 1.8% is not enough? And also the aspect of food waste come to mind in the food chain. How do we also address that if we are also looking at homegrown solutions to addressing this?
Number one, I believe that the minimum investment in agriculture should not be less than 10% of the annual national budget. It shouldn't be. That is number one. Number two, we have to make concerted efforts to invest in small-scale farming. Number three, we have to make sure that everything we do, we support local production, food systems. Number four, we have to make sure that whatever we do, it is gender inclusive. We tend to think in Nigeria that, oh, the men will do this, the men will do that. And we are not getting anywhere until we start thinking about women's rights, gender equality, women's interest, youth interest. We will not be able to go far, unfortunately. So we have to think, how can we make our women and girls and boys and young ones to key into it? How do we support them? That is another way to do it. And beyond that, we have to talk about climate resilience. There's no point. I mean, just a couple of days ago, rain fell in Chad, and you can just imagine. Jamena was flooded, and over 440 people, 4,000 people got homeless. So it's that bad. The drought that we are experiencing in some part of the country now, the flooding we are experiencing in some part of the country, this landslide we are experiencing in the country. What is the government doing about it? Those farmers that have been driven away from their farms by pastoralists, what has been done? Not only that, we have people who invested so much in agriculture. At the end of the day, after the 12 months, they harvest, or 9 months, they harvest their yams, their cassavas, the tubers are eaten up by cattle. What is being done? We still continue to have this heather pastoral, conflicts, skirmishes here and there, insecurity. Some people cannot even go to their farms anymore because they don't feel secured. They get kidnapped, or their wives or the women there get raped, or they get killed on their farmlands. We need to do more on this. So these are the areas we think the government should really look inwards. We need to invest in agriculture, just like we need to invest in healthcare and education. These three core sectors, the government needs to take it seriously. And I think the earlier we start looking at that, the better. We might say, oh, we talk about hunger. I've not seen the people dying on the streets, unfortunately. It's because you have not really interacted. Excuse me? Right. It's because you have not really interacted with the people, and you have not gone to the communities where this happened, or the data are not readily available now. Nigerians are hungry. Before, it was only when we were in school as children from poor homes, in the universities and all that, that we got to know things called 101 or 011 and all that. Now Nigerians are now 001 or even 010. That simply put, they don't have their breakfast, they struggle to get lunch, and they don't have dinner. It is a case of emergency. It is pathetic, and the government needs to step up and do something about it.
Look at the issue of insecurity that also has blighted the agricultural sector. And we have heard you speak. You've reportedly advocated for what has been called a non-violent approach now to resolving the conflict between farmers and herdsmen. The men cannot even go to farms in many parts of the country due to this, the enormosity of the problem, the enormous security challenges. So tell us more about your standpoint, how you see that this problem could be curbed by nonviolent, or maybe in addition to, a more forceful approach on the part of government to tackling insecurity.
Thank you. I think we have come up as an organization, international organization, to say that we believe so much in alternative dispute resolution. There's no doubt about it. We have to be thinking of how can we solve our problems without resorting to violence, without resorting to conflicts. We have to be more of a listening people, an interacting people, and a conversing people, and a tolerant people, if we must make it as a country. It is very unfortunate that now you get to hear about people being killed for what seemingly as minor issues in those days. We rarely hear of Nigerians being killed unnecessarily when we are kids, unfortunately. But now, every little thing you hear that community has been invaded, and houses, and these so-called houses are, in many instances, are even huts that people just manage to put together just to exist. You heard that these houses have been burned down, dozens of people have been massacred, blood is flowing all over many communities. This is really unfortunate. That now calls for not just to the government. The government needs help. The authorities need help. We need the community leaders, the religious leaders, the politicians, the enablers, and those who can really speak and the people in the community will listen. They need to step up. This is not the Nigeria of our dream. We have to know how to solve our problems without resorting to violence. There was a time when I was able to drive from Lagos to Sokoto alone. I did not speak Hausa language when I was going for my NYSC in those days. And I drove from Lagos to Sokoto, from there to now Zamfara State, Talata Mafara, and back. A couple of years ago, even as of 2014, I was able to drive from Abuja to Hadejia. You see, because the roads were safe, relatively safe. Unfortunately, it is so bad now. Everywhere you go, Nigerians with very little trigger, everyone wants to resort to violence, to self-help. Simply, I don't know, maybe because they think the government is not listening or the government is not, they can't get justice through the normal, judicial system, or they feel threatened. But we have to look for how to redirect Nigerians back. This is not who we are. This is not who we should continue to be. And every hands must be on deck. We can't just say the government will do it, the government will do it, the government will do it.
Okay.
The police cannot be everywhere. And by the way, it is not just from the barrels of the guns that can get peace. You have to, after all the barrels of gun has silenced, you still have to talk. You have to go to the negotiating table. So the Hausa man, the Fulani man, the Yoruba man, the Edo man, the Ora man, everyone should be able to learn the lesson to say, okay, what is our problem? How can we solve it? And I think as long as the Nigerians are able to see the government being sincere, being fair to all, being just, and being ready to treat every Nigerian equal, we will be able to do this.
All right. We have to leave it here now. Thank you so much, Dr. Vincent Ahonsi, the MD and Country Director of Oxfam. We thank you for your insight and everything we have discussed on here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.